On the Temple Mount, a new order of knights made their headquarters above ruins tied to Solomon's temple. Within a generation, legends claimed they were no longer only guards of pilgrims, but seekers of something buried, sacred, and never fully explained. What did the Templars really connect to beneath that stone? If their public mission was protecting pilgrims, why did later storytellers insist the order's real story began under the stones of Solomon's temple? Picture the red cross on a white cloak set against contested holy ground. History remembers the Knights Templar as a military religious order of the crusading age, yet their name and early base bound them to a place already heavy with ancient memory, the site linked, in tradition, to Solomon's temple, long destroyed before those knights ever arrived. That is the tension that still holds attention, not a proven treasure map, not a verified recovery of sacred relics, but a real foothold on sacred geography, later wrapped in legend, theory, and speculation that refused to settle. Contested holy ground, medieval power networks, and unfinished stories about what authority leaves behind still draw people back to the same silhouette. In this Empire Secrets investigation, we move carefully. Facts first: who the Templars were, where they stood, and what can actually be said about their connection to the Temple Mount. Then we open the thinner trail, stories of Solomon's temple relics, hidden treasure routes, and claims that grew after the order fell. Each layer will be labeled clearly, because thin evidence deserves careful hands. The stones remain, the fullest treasure story remains unproven, and the question on the Mount is still waiting. To understand the Templars and Solomon's temple, we have to begin not with treasure maps, but with a city under strain. In the age of the Crusades, Jerusalem sat at the center of pilgrimage routes that drew Christians across land and sea. The roads were long, the terrain hard, and the risks real. Travelers needed more than devotion, they needed protection. Out of that pressure emerged a new kind of brotherhood, men bound by religious vows and military duty, tasked with guarding pilgrims and serving a crusading kingdom that was always fragile at the edges. These men became known as the Knights Templar, a recognized medieval military religious order. Their public role was plain enough in the surviving outline of the story. They fought, they organized, they built a reputation for discipline and privilege inside a world of competing lords, church authorities, and holy claims. What made them distinctive was not only the sword and the cross, but the name and the ground attached to them. Early in their history, their identity and headquarters were linked to the temple area in Crusader Jerusalem, a precinct already heavy with sacred meaning long before any knight arrived. That meaning reaches back much further than the Middle Ages. Solomon's Temple, in Jewish memory and in the wider Abrahamic imagination, stands as an ancient sacred reference point, a house of worship, kingship, and divine presence associated with a distant biblical past. By the time Crusader forces held Jerusalem, that first temple tradition was already ancient history. The temple itself, as remembered in scripture and later tradition, had long been destroyed. What medieval people saw on the Mount was not Solomon's standing sanctuary restored, but a contested sacred landscape layered with later buildings, rival claims, and the afterglow of older stories. This distinction matters. The Templars occupied a medieval city and a medieval political order. They did not step into an intact Solomonic complex waiting to be catalogued. The durable factual anchor is more careful and more limited. The order's name and early base were tied to the Temple Mount precinct in Crusader Jerusalem. That association is real enough to explain why later centuries kept reading symbols into their presence. Living on charged ground creates authority. It also creates rumor. A headquarters on holy real estate can make an ordinary military mission sound like a secret one, especially once storytellers begin looking backward for hidden purposes. So the path of this episode follows a deliberate sequence. First comes the documented connection, place, name, and crusading context. Then comes the thinner trail, where relics said to belong to Solomon's temple enter the legend. After that comes the question of why those stories spread, hardened, and traveled so far beyond what the firm record can carry. A real headquarters on sacred ground is one thing. How did that become a centuries-long trail of claimed relics and hidden treasure? The strongest thread in this story is not a buried chest, it is a name and a place. In Crusader Jerusalem, the order that became known as the Knights Templar took its identity from the temple area itself. Their early headquarters were linked to the Temple Mount precinct, ground already heavy with sacred memory. That is the documented connection we can hold with the most confidence, not a verified haul of ancient temple treasure, but an association of naming, base, crusading purpose on one of the most contested pieces of holy real estate in the medieval world. In Empire Secrets terms, place is never only geography. When a military religious order inhabits ground tied, in memory, to Solomon's temple, authority and rumor travel together. The first temple tradition belonged to a much older age. By the time medieval knights arrived, that temple had long been gone. Yet the landscape still carried the weight of the claim. People who watched armed monks live above such ground did not need an inventory of finds to start asking what those knights might know. Guard or seek. That is how sacred geography works. Control of a symbolically charged site creates prestige. Prestige invites stories. Stories over generations harden into legend. A force stationed to protect pilgrims could, in the public imagination, become something more, keepers of secrets, seekers beneath the surface, inheritors of a deeper mission. None of that leap requires proof of tunnels, sealed chambers, or recovered vessels. It only requires the human habit of reading meaning into powerful locations. We should stay careful. The later bond between the Templars and Solomon's Temple is often symbolic and retrospective. Storytellers looked back at the order's name and base and filled the silence with what they wanted the past to contain. That is not the same as evidence that the Templars recovered relics from Solomon's temple. The firm ground remained simpler and more modest. They were named for the temple. They were based in the temple area in Crusader Jerusalem. They operated in a world where sacred sites already carried enormous spiritual and political weight. A military order on contested holy real estate would naturally attract tales about what lay below or before them. Later ages would answer those questions with relic custody and treasure trails, but those answers belong to a different layer of the story, one built on the real foothold rather than proven by it. What they actually searched for underground, if they searched at all, is not something thin evidence can invent, and this investigation will not invent it. So the documented link is naming, location, and crusading context. The legendary inflation comes afterward. If the solid history is mostly about where they lived and what they were called, where do the relic hunting legends actually begin? Here the ground changes under our feet. We leave the firmer record of name, base, and crusading role and step into clearly labeled legend territory. Fact first and kept small on purpose. The Knights Templar were a recognized medieval military religious order. Their early identity was tied to the temple area in Crusader Jerusalem. Their public mission involved protecting pilgrims and fighting in the wider crusading world. That much can be stated without turning the story into a treasure hunt. Legend begins where desire meets sacred memory. In later storytelling, the order is no longer only a band of warrior monks on contested ground. It becomes a circle of seekers and guardians said to have hunted, found, or protected objects tied to Solomon's temple, to the biblical furniture of holiness that tradition placed there long before any medieval knight arrived. The ark, temple vessels, and other named sacred things appear again and again in popular imagination. They do not appear here as proven Templar recoveries. They appear as the kinds of objects later storytellers wanted a powerful order to touch. To understand why those stories felt natural, we have to understand relic prestige in the medieval world. Sacred objects were not only objects of devotion, they were spiritual capital. A famous relic could draw pilgrims, raise the standing of a church or a city, and lend a soft authority no sword could fully replace. In that climate, an order already linked by name to the temple was almost destined to attract rumors about what it might have found beneath older stones. Association invited invention. Invention hardened into legend. So the popular question remains open. Did the Templars hide relics from Solomon's temple? It is a curiosity hook driven by later storytelling rather than settled history. It is not a closed case file. Theory and speculation push further still. Some modern retellings imagine hidden transfers, secret guardianship, quiet removals under cover of war, or a private custodianship that outlived the order's public face. Those claims can be explored as ideas people still argue over. They should not be upgraded into ledger entries. There is no strong public documentary proof in the material we can responsibly use here that turns temple relic custody into verified Templar business. That low evidence confidence matters. Exploration is not revelation. The absence of firm inventories, clear find reports, or undisputed contemporary proof is not a dramatic gap we fill with certainty. It is a boundary. On one side stands what can be said about an order, a place, and a crusading role. On the other stand legends of temple relic custody and theories of secret guardianship. Keeping those layers separate is the only way the mystery stays honest, and yet the stories do not thin out when the proof does, they thicken. When relic legends are thin on proof, why do treasure trail stories feel even more specific and more persistent? That question opens the most magnetic layer of the Templar temple mystery. Not only a name, not only a headquarters on sacred ground, a trail, hidden caches, secret routes, guarded knowledge said to bind a medieval military order to objects remembered with Solomon's temple. Here the episode promise must be handled with care. Knights Templar treasure trails linked to Solomon's temple relics belong chiefly to the mythic afterlife of a real order. The Templars left a documented footprint in Crusader Jerusalem and across the wider networks of medieval Christendom. Their later image, though, grew far beyond charters and battlefield duty. Storytellers began to imagine paths of wealth and holiness stretching away from the Temple Mount and into the shadows of Europe. Fact and legend separate most sharply at the order's fall. Historically, the Templars were suppressed in a dramatic political and legal campaign. A privileged institution was dismantled. Arrests, trials, pressure, and the seizure of assets created a vacuum. When a powerful network ends suddenly, people ask what vanished with it. Administration leaves gaps. Property changes hands. Loyalties scatter. Into that silence, legend moves quickly. According to later storytelling, the order did not simply end. In these accounts, something was saved. Wealth was moved ahead of the net. Knowledge was protected. Objects tied in popular imagination to the sacred geography of Solomon's temple were said to travel along secret lines of brotherhood. Treat those proposed trails as speculative storytelling patterns, not reconstructed itineraries. History did not draw a reliable map of chests leaving the temple area for named hideouts, and this investigation will not invent destinations, tunnels, inventories, or modern recoveries to fill the blank. Still, the stories endure for reasons that feel almost structural. Sacred geography plus a fallen elite order invites unfinished narrative. The Templars had been more than guards of pilgrims. They operated with unusual financial reach for their age, moving resources across frontiers and holding privileges ordinary knights did not enjoy. When such a structure collapses, the mind hunts for hidden continuity. Knights, empire-scale finance, religious authority, and contested holy ground form a triangle that keeps generating questions even when the paperwork is thin. What people claim is one thing. What can be shown is another. Some theories suggest Templar wealth was shifted before suppression fully closed. Other legends braid that wealth together with temple relics, as if gold and holiness shared one coffer. Still, other speculation treats the trail less as physical treasure and more as guarded knowledge, symbols, claims of ancient inheritance, a secret reading of the order's temple identity. All of these remain exploratory frames. They explain why audiences return to an evergreen mystery niche. They do not convert thin evidence into settled fact. The stronger the drama of the fall, the sharper the hunger for secret survival. That is the engine. A red cross becomes a cipher. A base on the Temple Mount becomes a doorway into older biblical memory. A suppressed order becomes, in legend, the last possible carrier of something too precious to list in public. So if the treasure map is mostly legend, what connection still remains strong enough to argue about today? Return to the ground we can actually walk. Historically, the Knights Templar were tied by name and early base to the temple area in Crusader Jerusalem. That link is real enough to matter. A military religious order took identity from sacred geography, lived on contested holy ground, and grew into a network of power later generations never fully stopped arguing about. That is the firm layer of the story. The Solomon's Temple relic narrative and the treasure trails said to carry those relics outward belong largely to later legend and speculation. Sacred place plus a powerful order equals durable mystery. It does not equal automatic proof of recovered temple treasure. Hold that distinction carefully. Marks left in history are not the same as stories built on those marks. The Order's public mission, its rise, its privileges, and its dramatic fall created perfect conditions for unfinished narratives. When an elite brotherhood is broken, people look for what might have slipped away: chests, roots, hidden guardianship, knowledge buried under stone. Those images feel specific because storytelling thrives on maps and objects. Yet feeling specific is not the same as being documented. In this investigation, we have treated the strongest claims as questions, not verdicts. Where evidence is thin, the honest answer is uncertainty, spoken calmly rather than filled with invention. What remains unproven is the fullest version of the Templar Temple treasure tale. No ledger handed to us here settles custody of biblical sacred furniture. No verified itinerary reconstructs a secret transfer of Solomon's temple relics as established fact. What remains compelling is the human pattern underneath. When knights stand on ground already heavy with ancient memory, rumor travels farther than inventory. Audiences return to this niche for the same reason the mystery endures: contested holy ground, a fallen order, and the possibility that something sacred was sought or shielded invite us to keep listening. Evergreen interest does not require a final chest to open. It requires a real headquarters, a charged name, and enough silence for legend to grow. If you have followed this Empire Secrets path from the Mount to the myths, ask yourself which part still feels like fact, which part feels like legend wearing the clothes of history. The difference is not a small detail. It is the whole craft of reading the past without letting desire rewrite it. Continue with us through more Rome, more knights, and more power networks still argued over today, where headquarters become symbols. Endings leave questions that outlive the people who first asked them. Close on the image we began with, the Temple Mount silhouette, the memory of Solomon's temple already ancient when Crusader stones were claimed, the Red Cross cloak of an order that made that precinct part of its identity. The stones remain. The fullest treasure story remains unproven, and one last loop stays open for the road ahead. Which other empire faction turned a real headquarters into a legend of hidden power, and what did history actually keep?